Today, I want to discuss in a brief manner an introduction that would be suitable for the Tiger King, which is in Vistas. Now, the person who wrote it is Kalki. He had a pen name Kalki. He was born around the time when let's say the late 1800s, when the British rule had established itself in India, and there was a kind of lifestyle adopted by the princely states, by the kings of the princely states. In those days, what happened was the British rule had shifted from the East India Company to the British Crown, and those who ruled, that is the Queen of England, did not want the kings of India to call themselves kings. So they insisted that those states which were under the British, more or less, that is, what has happened is there were some kingdoms that were defeated by the British outright. There were some kingdoms that need not be defeated by the British because they were very weak. And these were the kingdoms that were very weak, which the British people controlled. And they controlled in a very hidden manner. It was not quite obvious. Only the princes, that is, the kings, who were now forced to call themselves princes, came to know about what was actually happening. Usually, what happened was the king died quite young, and we will find out how the king died quite young. And his heir, because he was too young to rule, went into the care of the British. And the British, there was a legal board that was established, which looked after the welfare of these children. And there was a ruler appointed instead of him, a guardian, who would look after the kingdom until the prince became old enough to rule the kingdom himself. Until then, this board was called as the board of wards, I think. I'll clarify that when I deal with the lesson. Now, since this child was brought up by the British, it acquired the taste of the British aristocracy. He was brought up like one of the British officers' children. In those days, the British officers were the aristocracy in India, and every youngster wanted to use those people, the British officers, as a role model, and they used to model their life on the life of the British aristocracy. And children, therefore, drank only the milk of a British cow, because Indian cows were considered not really that standard. And they used to read only English books, and they used to see only English movies, because everything was that was English was good, and anything that was Indian was not good. And as the child grew up to look up to its British superiors. And then there was one fine day when he was 20 years old. He inherited his kingdom, and the way he lived was very similar to the way the British officers ruled, the way they lived. And that was a life of pleasure, only bothering about using the vast wealth that is now laid in its hands, or the child's hands, using it for its own pleasure. These were children, or let's say descendants of mighty rulers, and now they have degraded to such a state that they were just like those British officers who were ruling India. And they went about exploiting the wealth of Indians. They went about destroying the forests. hunting was a favorite sport, and there were laws that said that if you killed so many tigers or so many lions, you will be given a great reward. And now the kings of these princely states also started adopting such ideas, and that is satirized throughout the story, The Tiger King. The Tiger King is a king who's addicted to tiger hunting. He's not as brave as a tiger. You'll find that when you read the story. When we go through the story, I'll explain it to you. He was not really brave. He was not brought up like the kings that were there, they descended from. That is, they were not taught all the fine arts of war. They were not brought up brave. They were brought up as weaklings, and the only thing that they really excelled in is copying whatever was British. And they were weaklings. They did not have the strength to fight against the British, and they didn't think of fighting against the British because that's not the way they were brought up. And with the passage of time, you find this man, like any rich aristocrat's son, uh, doing what was happy for him, what was good for him, what he thought was enjoyable. He thought this wealth that is laid at his feet was for his own pleasure, and he can use it in a way that gives him happiness. So he started hunting left and right, hunting especially these tigers and lions, because the British said these are bad things. They need to be hunted down. And as they kept hunting, it became an addiction. Like any sport, if you are the sport of hunting also can lead to addiction. They were addicted to hunting, and so was this king. He was addicted to hunting of tigers. So you'll find that he shows some of the withdrawal symptoms of people who don't get the thing that they're addicted to. When they don't get it, they start showing this withdrawal symptoms. He starts displaying those kind of symptoms because of the addiction to hunting of tigers. He actually decimates the tiger population in his country, in his kingdom, and then he goes around trying to do the same with the rest of the kingdoms. And he sets in for himself a deadline of 100 tigers. He manages to kill 100 tigers, and then he thinks of some other thing. Maybe that brings a kind of a pause. It was not a very strong addiction, not something chemical. So he could, for a time, wean himself off, and he started enjoying life in other ways, like celebrating his son's birthday, celebrating whatever functions were available. And during that celebration, um, a sliver of wood got into his thumb, and he continued playing. He was not very literate. He was not very aware of what was happening to him. He was not aware of anything. He was a dumb fellow, and he didn't care about his health. He thought everything, you just have to take life very easy. You don't have to do anything for yourself, anything for your children. Even the kind of gift that he buys for his child, very cheap. He's not bothered about keeping his son happy. He just wants to enjoy himself because he's got a child, and the child is a toy for him. He wants to enjoy life with that toy. And he buys a toy for the child, and that at a very cheap rate, gets a sliver into his thumb that becomes infected. He probably ignores when it gets infected, and the infection grows so bad that they had to amputate his arm. And the probably I believe that the British thought high time what happened to his father should also happen to him. They must do away with him. So they sent 3 doctors from Madras. So probably this is a story of the Madras presidency. Now that was a time when there were around 600 presidencies throughout India, and this was a small kingdom in Madras presidency, and they sent someone from Madras, which is supposed to be the center of Madras presidency, and he came over. Those surgeons came over, and they operated on him, and they declared operation successful. The king is dead. So you can imagine what the operation's purpose was. because it was successful. The purpose was to decimate the king, to kill the king. So now that child, which has just celebrated 3 years birthday, will go to the board where he was brought up as a let's say an orphan. And he'll be brought up in the same way. This is how the machinery worked. They created a dummy king who ruled over the kingdom, and then he gave birth to a little child. And when it was old enough, and the British thought that this person who has been ruling so long, need not rule anymore. You can just do away with him, and they kill him off. And they find some excuse to kill him, and they build. You see throughout the story, they build stories around him. The story of the astrologer is something that they built in order to ensure that the people also don't understand what's happening, and they think it is because of the curse of not listening to the what the astrologer said, that the man who was killed, he was foolish, he didn't listen to the astrologer, so he got killed. But actually that was not the case. That was something that was a story created. There are a lot of clues to show in the lesson to show that it was a story created just to make sure that they can do whatever they want with the king or the prince, whoever it was, and to do anything that they want with the kingdom. So they got their way finally, and the Tiger King died, and his legend stays back. And if you really look closely into the legend of the Tiger King, it is full of mockery. In fact, the name Jung Jung Bahadur, mockery, outright mockery. The whole story is a satire on those who were in power at that time. At that time means referring to the princely states. During those times, those are the people who were in power, and it was satire on them because they were not really in power. They were just puppets in the hands of the British, who actually were ruling vicariously. Now, I'll deal with many of the statements that I had stated here when I actually teach the lesson.